Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to our breakout session. I'm surprised that anyone's joined us at all because, quite frankly, I'd rather watch Daniel Hannan than myself. So thank you for those who have joined us. For those who don't know me, my name's Karl Kutasi. I'm the president of the HR Nicholls Society. I'm also a lawyer in my spare time. I do a lot of industrial law. So industrial relations is a topic of fun to me, I suppose, put it that way. For those who don't know what the HR Nicholls Society is, we have a very close relationship with the ATA and the Liberty Movement. It was an organisation started in the 1980s. At the time, and everyone I know pretty much involved in this conference is relatively young. I'm not trying to claim that I'm old, I'm only 39, but nonetheless, it's very hard for anyone in Australia under the age of 50 to remember a time when we had extraordinarily illiberal industrial relations laws, even by the standards of what we're used to today. And the HR Nicholls Society was at the forefront of the push to lead that decentralisation, and much of what was pushed for at the time was achieved. But our job is not finished. We have today still in Australia, very heavily regulated industrial relations system, and we continue to urge for that to be changed. So anyone who's on the call who would love to join the HR Nicholls Society, I strongly encourage you to do so. But today we're going to hear from three different speakers. We're going to hear from Jack Mcguire, who's with the Nurses Professional Association. He's going to be talking about competitive unionism, and he might also have something to say about superannuation as well. We're going to be hearing from Emilie Dye, who just as of this week has become the Executive Director of the HR Nicholls Society, and she's going to be talking about universal basic income. And we're also going to be hearing from Phil Johnson, and he is working with a company called Tanda. They do HR and industrial software programs and software. And he's going to be talking about the practical side of what's been going on in the industrial system with the stress that the COVID pandemic has put on it, and some practical learnings from that, which should lead to reform. So I'm going to go in the order I just mentioned the names. So we'll start with, I should say everyone too, by the way, right at the end, there'll be an opportunity for questions, but feel free to note your questions in the comments, and we'll pick up on those as we go towards the end. So take it away, Jack. You got to unmute yourself, mate.
Sorry, you got me now?
Gotcha.
Thanks, Karl. So I'm as Karl said, I'm involved with the Nurses Professional Association of Queensland, also now involved with the Teachers Professional Association of Queensland. We've set up an alternative teachers union as well. We also have a bus drivers alternative union that's been set up, and we're looking to do more. So my official role, I guess, is managing director of a service provider company that provides all the services to these unions that we set up. So we have, as I said, bus teachers on the go at the moment. We're nurses. We have about 5,500 members at the moment. We're turning over close to $2 million a year. And because our prices are half the price of the traditional unions, because we don't engage in the politics and the election gaming that the other labour aligned unions do, we're costing them $4 million a year in turnover, which is really starting to have quite a significant impact. If I can share my screen, which might be a bit of a, here we go. Please bear with me. Can you guys see that screen? So I guess it's important when we're looking at competitive unionism to understand what kind of money we're looking at here. So with nurses at the moment in Queensland, there's 60,000 nurses. We have, as I said, about 5,500 of those, but there's still 60,000 with the QNMU. They say they bring in $28 million a year. Their reported assets are $20 million a year. They can also have trusts, so they can funnel squirrel money away that you can't even see. So huge amounts of money. Teachers, similar, very big money. When you go nationally, the money is still quite significant and cause for alarm. How they have been doing that and charging so much money is because of a quirk in the Industrial Relations Act. If you want, and everyone has sort of been playing along by these rules and staying in their lane. In order to, everyone believes that you need to register to be a trade union, become a registered organisation. In order to register as a registered organisation, you have to jump through a number of hoops: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Eventually, it gets down to if you can already conveniently belong to a already registered organisation, then you can't register. So essentially setting up that monopoly demarcation for those unions that want to register and play in that space. What we've found though is, I guess by luck, but I'd like to say through our legal genius, we ended up at some point engaging we deal with 3 barristers usually. Jim Murdoch QC, very well respected in the industrial space, but also Joe Ludwig, the Honourable Joe Ludwig, the former Industrial Relations Minister who drafted the Fair Work Act under Julia Gillard, and also Troy Spence, who was the husband of Terry Butler. And when we met with Joe Ludwig, he sort of said with a wry smile that he was wondering when someone would pick up that competitive unionism has sort of been around since the 80s. And how that's come about is through, I'll get to it in a minute, but this is the law that we're exploiting. So an industrial association means an employee organisation, and an organisation is defined as a registered organisation. So again, you can't be a registered organisation unless you set up a dispute to be, the top dog, and you have to knock off the QNMU. But you can also be an association of employees having as a principal purpose, a protection and promotion of their interests. So that's us. We operate in that space, and we are therefore an industrial association. Now, funnily enough, trade union isn't defined anywhere in any state legislation. The only place you can find a definition of trade union is in the Australian Human Rights Commission Act. So for the purposes of all the benefits and everything industrially, protections that employees get, it's all about industrial associations. So as a trade union, all these registered bodies, but then C, they had to include any other similar body. Why? Because Gough Whitlam, I think it was back in the 70s, signed us up to the ILO, International Labour Organization conventions, in particular the Freedom of Association Article 2. Workers and employers without distinction whatsoever shall have the right to establish and join organisations of their choosing without authorisation. So basically saying that you can and must be able to form and join trade unions without there being too much regulation about it. So how the government got around that is by setting up this alternate set of rules where you get a couple of privileges, like sitting at the bargaining table, for an automatic seat at the bargaining table when you're negotiating enterprise agreements. We get around that because everyone's allowed to, in the federal sphere, so when you're talking about the Fair Work Act and private companies, they can simply elect or nominate a bargaining representative. So they nominate the NPAQ to be the bargaining representative, and there we are with a seat at the table. And ultimately, it's a numbers game. So if an enterprise agreement is to get up, it's a vote from all employees. So it would be remiss of an employer to not value what we have to say, because it's their employees who ultimately have a vote, who'll be voting on this enterprise agreement. Funnily enough, also, at the start of this year, January 1st, the Labor government brought in the Human Rights Act. And in the Human Rights Act, Clause 22, subsection 2, says that every person has a right to freedom of association, including the right to form and join trade unions. So even the Labor government's sort of tripping up over themselves in terms of this union stuff, and the horse is really sort of bolted on it. We do have a very significant case on at the moment on this very particular issue, the Gilbert case. It's received a fair bit of media attention recently. That was one of our members in her capacity as the branch secretary or a delegate of the industry association, spoke to the media about the poor quality of graduate nurses. So taking a pot shot at the universities, basically people, nurses coming out, haven't ever inserted a catheter before, just not job ready. She got a show cause notice, instantly got a show cause notice from her employer, the Prince Charles Hospital, which is a government hospital, saying that she should be sacked. And, she said all this because of her role as a trade union official, which you can't do because, even the policy says, Queensland Health Policy says that trade union officials have these sort of protections. So where that's coming in now is whether we are actually a trade union or whether we're an industrial association. The fight is sort of almost over before it began, though, because the Crown's case is that we can't be an industrial association because we're incorporated. So if that's the case, which I don't take that reading, and our council don't take that reading, but if that is the case, we simply unincorporate and we will be an industrial association. We'll become even more of a, lawless cowboy outfit. So good luck trying to, regulate us then. I guess just quickly about unionism in general and what's sort of happening and the enterprise bargaining space. There's sort of a number of different reasons why people join the unions. So the SDA, the AWU, the TWU, they all sort of make it they do deals, right, with employers. So we've seen with the Penny Vickers case where the Coles agreement got booted out because they failed the better off overall test, and it redefined what the better overall test was. Basically saying that each individual has to be better off overall than the award. So that mechanism or that decision stopped groups like the SDA doing deals with Coles to put in subpar agreements, which mean the workers get paid less, which means that Coles get a cheaper labour unit cost, which means that they're able to grow and compete unfairly. In fact, we heard anecdotes that the IGA took the exact same agreement that Coles and Woolies had and tried to submit it, and it was the SDA that opposed it. So it's just madness what's going on. In the public service, you obviously join the union because you need to promote, because you want to get a promotion. The CFMEU, they sort of have it's almost like a duopoly at the top, the tier one contract, the tier one builders, and they sort of make it, the CFMEU try and keep all the tier twos from becoming a tier one because they're very tight knit with them. They sign very generous EBs, so the workers get paid a hell of a lot more, and they just pass on that bill to the taxpayer, who ultimately pay it. What we're seeing now, though, funnily enough, and I think it was probably stemming as a result of the Vickers case, is a lot of the EBs that we have at the moment, the employer, comes and negotiates, but ultimately then doesn't want a resolution. So you have to go through the whole dance of, trying to force a negotiation, all the rest of it. But ultimately, why would an employer ever want to have a enterprise agreement now when you can't do those deals that used to happen? So it seems to be the way that everything is heading, is that employers are happy to let their enterprise agreements lapse, not negotiate a new one, and then just stagnate on that EB until the award catches up, and they'll eventually just revert to the award. So there's a huge sort of union problem, and we say perhaps we should deregulate that whole space, and let us have the same sort of privileges, I guess, that are offered to the registered organisations. The only one really that we don't have that they have is the forced right of entry. So we can come and sit in the break room and tout for union membership, and that's literally the only thing that we've been hit with from the other unions is, they don't have right of entry. And really all that means is you have right of entry to go and inspect the books, but easily a lawyer can just as easily request the books to have a look to see if people are being paid correctly. And then there's also the sitting in the break room at lunchtime. But why would we need to do that? It's sort of a bit of an old school tactic, really. I guess an interesting question is, mindful of time, is when do we win? You might say that we have 60,000 members, and the QNMU have also the QNMU have 60,000 members. We have 5,500 members. Jack, geez, it's going to be a hell of a long time before you actually win. Well, if you look at our growth projections are good. We're growing faster and faster all the time, and mostly because referrals are our biggest growth driver. So the more members we have, the more members that are referring, the faster we grow. And what that looks like in the financials is that, the QNMU, as I said, was bringing in $28 million a year. But as we take on members, their revenue starts to deplete. And we're expecting sometime next year, their overheads will start to outstrip their revenue. So that means they either need to put off all those political staffers that they put on to, campaign during elections. It means, they have to just focus on the core provision of, offering trade union services, which they haven't done. In fact, with this competition that we've provided, they've gone the exact opposite way, and they've just put on, more and more staff, and they've just become even more bloated. So it's really actually a interesting space that's happening at the moment. What are they doing to stop us? Well, I'm being sued for defamation personally, and so is the MPAQ for saying that they failed to uncover $1 million worth of underpayments. True. They spend money on frivolous legal proceedings. True. In fact, in that Gilbert case, they they paid for a silk to sit in the 3-day trial and not say a word because they weren't allowed to intervene. Absolute madness. And then we've also got another lawsuit, Graham, my business partner, because we set up a third-party website, unioncompare.com.au, and we said they support political parties, and now we're being sued, and that's defamatory, apparently. Whereas I thought they would have been proud to support political parties, given that, back in Barcaldine, under the Tree of Knowledge, they formed the Labor Party, the unions, but obviously not anymore. And now we're finally fighting this Queensland Health Memorandum. Back in March last year, there was a memorandum sent out by the Queensland Health Department saying that the MPAQ cannot represent or advocate on any industrial issue, which was wrong. And it's now since come out in this Gilbert case that I was talking about before, that a professional officer of the QNMU, which is the highest paid employee, she's a former QNMU operative, former Morris Blackburn lawyer, was in the acting director of industrial relations role and drafted the memorandum, then sent a copy of it across to the QNMU with track changes. They then drafted more of it, sent it back, and flicked it up to the chief human resources fellow that was acting also at the time, and sent it out. So it's amazing how much a state Labor government will manoeuvre to try and shut us down. They really are quite concerned about us. And I guess if I were them, I would be too. We're seriously cutting off their funding model in a big way, just through competition and providing workers at the grassroots what they actually want. In terms of expansion and where we're going, we want to move into providing an alternative police union. We want to restart the old AJA, the Australian Journalists Association, which is the second union form, but they've since let their name lapse, and we've now registered it. And then we want to move all these unions interstate. So, there is a bit of a commercial incentive behind it. As I said, we have a service provider company that provides all these, and what we need more than anything else is recommendations of people who might be interested in running a union and competing against these sort of left-wing Goliaths that don't provide, the core service well to the workers. That's probably enough from me now, though. I'm conscious of taking up too much time. The only other point I will make, though, is we have done some rough calculations, and we think that there's about 200,000 workers across Australia who are in unions who would probably vote non-Labor, so Conservatives or whatever. And currently, there's no offering for them. And I guess the major right-wing political party, the Liberal government, it really isn't doing themselves any favours with union bashing. I think there's a new sort of political grouping coming about, which is those sort of blue collar, you know, non-left wing workers who are in a union and do have a, you know, some sort of allegiance to that union. And I guess that's where One Nation are coming in at the moment. So I think the, you know, the coalition government federally and the LNP at a state level probably need to pivot and rethink their strategy on that, and perhaps competitive unionism and offering workers choice, supporting the choice of an individual worker is a politically palatable thing to do. That's enough from me. I'll throw back to you, Kyle.
Thank you, Jack. That was a very interesting presentation. I was unaware of how much you guys were growing. So well done on that. Well, no doubt there'll be opportunity for people to ask some more questions of you later. We'll flick over now to Emilie Dye, who's been the ATA now for about 18 months and is now also the Executive Director of the HR Nicholls Society. So Emilie, take it away.
Wonderful, thank you. So universal basic income, it's been a very popular topic in recent times. The US presidential election, Andrew Yang was recommending the freedom dividend, and listening to his campaign videos about trickle up economics, I was totally sold, but better in theory than in practice. Also some figures like Elon Musk, who has said that automation is going to take over, and so we'll need a universal basic income. Is a big proponent of it, but his judgment, he also has endorsed Kanye for president. We'll get to the automation later. Charles Murray, he wrote a book, In Our Hands, A Plan to Replace the Welfare State, in 2006. And one of his main arguments was for universal basic income. And he was recommending $10,000 a year plus health insurance to replace existing social programs as a way of kind of getting rid of the welfare state that we have now in various Western countries. And then a lot older, Thomas Paine, his view was that the earth and land belonged to the citizens and they deserved whatever was cultivated from it, not the state, and that should be shared among the people, and that wealth should be captured and returned to society. But this is one of those concepts that is really great in theory, sounds good, but not so much in practice. And it may work on a small scale, but not on a massive scale, and definitely not on a national scale. We've seen quite a few small experiments with UBI, including most well-known, I think, is the Alaska oil dividend. But most recently, we have had quite the natural experiment with massive universal basic income, thanks to coronavirus. In Australia, we have JobKeeper and Job Seeker and soon Job Maker, whatever that entails, which is with JobKeeper and Job Seeker both just really giving money out. The US has actually just written checks to people of $1,200 to millions of Americans, and they're talking about doing a second round of checks. In Australia, these payments have led to quite a bit of rent seeking, which is unsurprising. People are taking advantage of the particularly JobKeeper when they don't need it, but that's because, I mean, they're taking advantage of the system, and I do not blame them. They're getting it because they're able to, and the government has not put in restrictions. Obviously, with a UBI, it would be more opened up, and so there wouldn't be those restrictions. That's the whole concept is really to restrict all of the bureaucratic roadblocks that we have with the welfare system. Also, one of the problems we've seen in Australia is, despite the idea of cutting the bureaucratic road system, and despite the fact that the government hasn't been able to stop people from getting these checks even though they weren't supposed to, the government still hired 5,000 extra people, which costs a lot of money. And when they gave out the checks, people stopped working, unsurprisingly. Childcare, the childcare sector was a big experiment that we had. We were proposing free childcare for all to try to help people get through coronavirus, which on concept doesn't make much sense to me, because if you're in lockdown, can't you watch your own kids? But, and apparently kids don't spread coronavirus. But they tried the childcare for all, and it was free, and they were just paying the workers JobKeeper. And no surprise, people stop showing up to work. And I think this is something that we would see with a universal basic income. And then lastly, just how does one pay for something like this? In Australia, we've had the largest stimulus package we have ever seen. It's going to take us decades and decades to pay it off. And it's arguable whether this was necessary, but it's something that needs to be considered, particularly as we start talking about universal basic income. So how does it work? It was designed mostly by economists, so they came up with a very efficient model. Well, some of them have come up with a very efficient model of using a value-added tax, which is actually a very smart idea, because if people stop working, they still have to pay taxes because they still have to buy things. The question is, will that be enough to pay for the amount that we are proposing, or that people have proposed? Some $10,000 is a lot of money. $1,000 a month is what Yang was proposing. And the other option is like what the Alaskan oil dividend is, and that is payments based on the value of a product, which is a pretty decent idea, and it's working well in Alaska. Alaska is not the largest country or largest state, and thankfully not that many people really want to move to Alaska. It's kind of cold. It's not a very hospitable climate, and even with that oil dividend, it hasn't caused like an influx of immigration that could be somewhat problematic. So the arguments for UBI is automation is going to take away all of our jobs in the future. This is a fear that we hear quite a bit, and it's a fear that's been around for a very long time. This is something that we heard at the turn of the century, when cars were invented, the most recent one, but yeah, when cars were invented, and you had Holden, is one of my favorite examples ever, because they were able to adapt. They were saddle manufacturers, and they adapted to making cars, and they changed and were able to keep up with the economy. And I'm hoping that we will see that same kind of thing happen as we continue to automate. Another great example with bank tellers. When the ATM was invented, people were terrified that bank tellers would all lose their jobs. But we actually still have bank tellers. And 45 years later, we've actually doubled the number of bank tellers that we had prior to the invention of the ATM. Really what happened was people started getting better jobs, less menial jobs. People were doing more fulfilling work, which is something I think we should really strive for as a society, not trying to get rid of work entirely. We automate because humans are expensive. If we didn't have to pay people so much, we probably wouldn't automate. So there's this toss-up here. People will continue to automate and continue to come up with more creative ways of saving money, as long as that is the more beneficial thing to do. And the other argument is it'll help with inequality. It will help with stagnating wages. Higher ed doesn't seem to give you job security in this time. I think that we are more concerned about stagnating wages and how we are doing as a society. We are better off today than we were 10 years ago. And that continues to be the case. We are getting better and better off as a society. We are richer than our ancestors. No, we don't necessarily own the same amount of things that we did in the past. People talk about how millennials don't own homes, but we still have a higher quality of life, if you're talking monetarily, than did our parents, which I think should be really considered as we are talking about the big issues of stagnating wages. We are better educated, and I think we should be really grateful for where we are as a society. We've come a long way. And lastly, and probably with UBI, the best argument I have seen is it is more efficient than the welfare state, which isn't saying much because, yeah, it's the welfare state. The government loves bureaucracy and isn't a fan of reducing it, and also isn't a fan of giving back. It's not a fan of reducing bureaucracy, and I don't see us really getting rid of the welfare state in the near future. We have huge problems with different groups and special interest groups that are going to want their payments. And if we don't get rid of the welfare state, then we just end up with checks plus universal basic income. And that is pretty much socialism, which as a society we have seen in the past does not work. People do stop working. We'll likely get inflation and other issues with it. It's not feasible. We cannot afford it without cutting spending at the same time as increasing it for universal basic income. We would bankrupt our countries. Yeah, the government is the government, and they are not very good at instituting efficient systems. So while economists may come up with great ideas on paper, bureaucracy is going to happen, and we need to account for that and be realistic. There is a cost to giving away money. Even the government can't do the easiest thing ever and give away money at a low cost. As we've seen with coronavirus, and the cost is taken, the bureaucratic cost of sending out JobKeeper and JobSeeker. And The Economist recently said they estimate that the United States could pay each person $6,300 a year if it cashed out all of its non-health transfer payments. And that would be $6,100 for Australia. However, that includes payments like the pension and Social Security. Those are not things that the government is likely to give up right away. And I don't know if they're things that we really yes, in a perfect world, we should, but we need some. It's not something that I see happening in a politically at all in the near future. And people would stop working. And I think this is a big one. As a society, we will be more fulfilled and be better off when people are working. Human capital is one of those unsung aspects of GDP that we don't recognize. And people receive better fulfillment, and they will have better mental health and be better off as humans when they are working and when they are contributing. I think that's a basic need of most people. And the argument against that for universal basic income is that, oh, well, they'll pursue education. But we also live in a world that is full of other things that are very distracting, and humans are by nature lazy. We balance leisure and work and leisure and income and making those decisions. If we bump that leisure amount up, people will stop working. And when people do stop working, we will also stop collecting as many taxes. And when we stop collecting as many taxes, then we don't have the funds to pay for the universal basic income. So it's this recurring problem. And just paying the rich or just taxing the rich more isn't gonna fix it, because the rich, like anyone else, will stop working and will stop contributing and will stop making more money if they're not getting the benefit for that. They're not getting the return. We also have concerns about inflation. If there's an abundance of something, then it's not worth as much. With scarcity comes benefit. If everyone has a bunch of money just automatically that they don't have to work for, which is free money, it's worth less. And it doesn't represent what it used to represent. So as it is now, our money represents an amount of time that we have produced, that we have worked for. Without that, then it becomes worth less, and that's how we get inflation. And inflation is really a tax in and of itself. It taxes people who have saved, and it makes their money worth less. So the more money that you have in the bank, it doesn't keep increasing, it keeps decreasing. It's a tax. And lastly, people will flock to a country for the wrong reasons. Right now, we have people coming into Australia because we do provide a very stable environment, and it's a very good society to start a life and do good work and prosper. But we would have people coming in for the payments, which isn't what we need. We need people that are producing that human capital, that are adding benefits to society instead of just taking. And that will be an issue if we try to institute a universal basic income. So those people that view universal basic income as being the end of poverty forever, must accept that it's not as practical or as it sounds. It may be perfect in the idealistic sense on paper, but when you start putting humans into the equation, things change. We also really need to consider what government is for. Is the job of government to make sure that no one is poor? Is the job of government to make sure that we all live in 2-bedroom apartments and have a nice car? I don't think that it is the job of the government to make sure that we are not poor. That's the job of you, and individuals have that personal responsibility to take care of themselves and take care of their families. This is a very controversial view, obviously. The government does have a role to provide a stable environment for its citizens. And that is a justification for things like roads and infrastructure, which allow people to succeed. It provides that baseline from which people can grow and get better from there. And it's also the justification for armies to protect from outside invaders. It's the justification for the Federal Reserve as the lender of last resort to make sure that the financial system doesn't crash, and especially that it doesn't crash because of poor governmental decisions. And it also provides a judicial system to make sure that we are able to make contracts and have those contracts upheld in order to operate as a society. But these are, that is the main, those are most of the main roles of government. It's not to make sure that we're not poor, it's not to take care of us. That's our job. We take the basic footing and go from there. So even with all the justifications for the payments made for COVID, they do not represent the perfect society where we are able to get money from the government and just live on the dole and watch Netflix all day, or whatever it is that we choose to do with our time. We will be much better off as a society if we continue to let the market function and let people pursue good jobs and keep striving for more. In a country like Australia, in a country like the United States, in most Western societies, we have a very good and stable environment with which to grow, and the government isn't taking us out at the knees. And I think we should be grateful for that and not expect the government to take care of us. And I think that's it for now. Thank you so much. I'll pass that back to you, Kyle.
Thank you. That was excellent. And we're starting to run short on time, so I'm going to flick straight over to Phil Johnson, who's with Tanda. They make workplace software, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what he's seen in practical side of things whilst COVID's been going on the Australian workplace and industrial regulation. So Phil, take it away, mate.
Thanks, Karl. To give a bit of context from what we see, like I guess you'd call it on the front line, we sell a workforce software that allows employers to schedule their employees. They clock in with the app that then calculates the consideration of their pay by applying the award conditions. So as COVID sort of started to hit, we were seeing people put in requests to cancel their subscriptions. And we made a company policy. We're going to call every single business who wants to cancel their subscription to understand what are their intentions. Are you going to close your business permanently? Are you filing for insolvency? Are you going to, you plan to retrade one day? When are you going to reopen? Basically trying to ascertain for our own purposes, sort of, when do you plan to open your business again, and when do you want your subscription to work again? And what we saw earlier in the year was genuinely some scary stuff. So we can predict forwards what people are going to do by whether they roster an employee. Yeah, and we looked forwards 2 weeks and just saw the cliff. So before you see inflation data, before you see anything like that, the cliff was there. No one was scheduling their employees. Like things looked really, really bad. But now we're looking at the opposite problem is these employers are starting to come back and they're starting to call us and say, hey, I want to open my account again. And we're having chats to them and trying to ascertain, so like, you know, how many staff do you plan to put in? Are you going to bring back the whole workforce? What's your plan? And like, if you look at the case of Victoria's an anomaly in Australia. People that down there, these business owners are defeated because really, like, they've had the false positivity of coming back. Their staff have returned. They're rostering staff. They're serving customers, and all of a sudden, you know, nothing. And that, you know, and that's complete odds to other states which are putting staff back. But the thing that's most concerning is the hesitation of employers to return their staff for reasons which really are confusions of the law, and that's what really is there's a couple of cases that paralleled COVID which really lead to it, and there's no time now that we need casual staff. You know, no time better than now. where you don't have that continuity that you can continue to operate. You could be closed by the government tomorrow, and you'll have no notice that you're going to be closed, no prior warning, and they just say you can't operate tomorrow. So if you're going to return your staff, you want to know that you've got the flexibility to also turn your staff tap off, because you could be forced to at any moment to turn your staff tap off. And at the start of coronavirus, there was the case with casual workers, the workpack case, where the headlines were reading things like casual workers went big on annual leave. So employers don't inform their decisions strictly off the details contained within case precedents. You see the headlines before you dig into the detail, and it's extremely complex to understand what these cases actually mean. But all these media agencies are touting casual workers now have annual leave entitlements, sick leave entitlements, and it's construed based on how complex the nature of employment law in Australia is that you can make these sort of headlines and no one can really say, hey, that's bullshit, that's not actually the truth. But employers believe it, and they talk to us, and they have these beliefs that we don't want to return people because they could make these claims like we owe them an annual leave entitlement, and that they're going to be entitled to a payout. And whether it's true or whether it's not, by the case law, like, these are people who own very practical businesses. They own pubs, they own fast food franchises, they're people who employ casual workers, and the law should not be a cause of concern to return staff to work. Now is the time that you, as an employer, should be able to return people and know with certainty that if the government turns off the tap, you should be able to turn off the tap as well, because it's not your decision, you're forced to. And I think we're just dealing with a whole set of new rules. And if you want to test socialism and socialist policies like the sort of the JobKeeper handouts, that the way to return these staff might be to test the opposite as well, which will be you should scrap the award system for a temporary period and see how you go with these employers just saying, hey, well, we think there's a 50% chance that we could trade this weekend based on what the government says, which is really just, you have no idea. It's just the general sentiment, and they can come out at 11 a.m. on a Sunday and say your business is closed, it's going to be closed for 6 weeks. Well, you should have the freedom as a business owner to do the same in negotiating the employment terms with your employees. And that might give people some clarity and some certainty in when they should return costs to their business, because I just don't see that people are going to hire staff with that sort of level of uncertainty. And they're certainly not going to be offering people new employment contracts, which, like, if our goal is to get back to the employment rate we're at, that's really what we need. Is we need employers to have confidence in putting people through the employment process and knowing that there's not going to be any negative recourse that's not caused by them, that's going to be caused by the government. And I guess it's the harsh reality that we're seeing on the front line. Cool. Karl, I'll put it back to you.
Well, thank you, everyone. That was all very interesting. It's over to question time now. I've had a couple of questions already put up on the group chat, which I'll start with. But if anyone else has got anything, feel free to chuck it up there now. The first question is one from Smite Yassi. I know that's not her real name, but we'll run with that for now. And she's asked, probably deliberately to get everyone going, is no one going to comment on how feminism has been detrimental to female well-being and child rearing? Who would like to start on that one first?
Is this related to employment law?
Absolutely. This
is good fun. No, I think that feminism has been beneficial. I think that women have more choice and more options because of feminism, and whether that's birth control, the right to vote. They have the option to actually participate in society for the benefit of their children, if you're talking specifically about children. Overall, I said feminism is a great benefit to the well-being of women in child rearing. That doesn't mean, however, that there is the question of what does feminism mean, and I haven't really gotten that. I consider myself a feminist, but not the feminists that we see ranting and hating on women. Those online, those are men haters. Men haters are not the same thing. Feminists are the people that fought for our right to vote. They're the people that believe that women should have a right to do whatever job they choose, and they shouldn't be told by the government that that's not what they're supposed to do. It's their job to assess risk and make decisions about which kind of careers they want, and to weigh whether they would prefer to have a large family or if they would prefer to have that big career, or both. I think it gives women more options, and the women that do choose to have families, I think, value that in a different way than those that decided to, that were forced to, or were not passionate. You have lots of stories about the alcoholic housewives of the 50s that this wasn't their passion, this isn't what they wanted. Not all women are like that. Most women, I would say, would prefer to follow that natural instinct and have children, but some don't. And I think it's a benefit to let women have that choice.
Do any of the men on the panel want to comment on that topic, or do they want to steer clear of it?
Haven't come across that in my union work.
Yeah, I just wanted to share something that's actually quite a scary trend, is people not giving feedback to candidates in interviews now. And I recently spoke to this with some very large companies, and they've adopted the policy that they just don't give feedback to candidates. And the reason is that they're just scared that they could say anything, and it could be, like case examples. You're not a cultural fit, and then bam, you've then got a legal issue on your hands. And I think that's detrimental to the workforce to not be able to give candidate feedback on anything. If you're a job seeker and you're going and getting jobs and getting knocked back, and you've gone to the interview stage and your employer gives you a default answer, oh, sorry, you didn't get the job. That's completely unhelpful to both parties. You have to be able to have transparency in the employment process to give feedback, and employers are pulling out of it. They're not doing that. That's going to be something that will prevent people from getting jobs, and return the economy back to normal.
Just on that, Phil, we're actually trying to hire a low-level admin person at the moment, and it's proving exceptionally difficult because no one wants a job. Job seeker is good enough for them. They get paid almost the same amount of money to sit at home doing nothing, or job keeper is, better than we can offer. Or it's just a really bizarre situation we're in with this economy, and I don't think the government's intervening is really helping at all.
Jack, is your job out on Gumtree? Because I think we might have posted in the wrong place.
Yeah, posted up a notice on the front door and no one's come in.
I had a question from Zeev, which is general comment in terms of IR reform. Workforce transition is especially important in times of pandemic and mass unemployment, bolsters the case for deregulation. I think Phil, you particularly touched on this, which is the sclerotic nature of a regulated system. What, maybe I'll go further with this. Has anyone got any suggestions on the ways in which they believe in a pandemic situation right now, what's the one thing that you would do to change the system to deregulate it? We'll start with you, Phil.
Well, firstly, I wouldn't form working groups with unions to try and figure out how to deregulate it. But, just scrap the traditional, you've got 122 awards to choose from, and these are the conditions. That you should not be required to seek legal guidance to hire a new employee. You should just be able to just look at what the laws are and be like, well, I just want to hire someone. That's the rate. Here's how I hire them. And it's clear as day. If you've got additional costs to hiring someone and you've got additional risk, you're going to be willing to pay a premium for automation rather than hiring a human. That's the concerning thing, is that these jobs being lost, you'd be like, well, if there's a legal risk to us now, and in Victoria, you might go to jail, you accidentally underpay someone, you're going to go to jail. If there's a legal cost to it, you're just going to pay more for automation than you would have paid for a person you could have had a job. That's the disappointing thing. Lower the bar in terms of the complexity to hire a new person, and lower the risk to employers. You'll have a far more amicable relationship between employers and employees.
What about you, Jack? What's your number one?
Well, I'll take the cheap way out here, and I'd say that what they should deregulate is the the restrictions on elective surgeries and all the other crazy stuff they did in the hospital space. We had reports back from our members, just only two hospitals, because they shut down elective surgeries. 800 casuals were out of work. They stood down, and this is the hospitals who are supposed to be trying to keep capacity for, and you have nurses being stood down because there's not enough work. It was just mad regulation and intervention. The other thing the government did with the regulation, which was silly, was they stepped in and gave Queensland Health money as part of the funding guarantee, because all the private hospitals, in order to facilitate the private hospitals, because the private hospitals had to shut because the only way they make money is through elective surgery. And in doing so, Queensland Health stripped all the private hospitals of their personal protective equipment, masks, etc., because Queensland Health didn't have any stockpile of it. And now the private health providers are struggling to reopen because, the PPE that they bought was, cheap at the time. It's now 5 times the cost.
Your complaints are very COVID specific, though, aren't they?
Yes. That's why I was taking the cheap way out.
We could have an entire day to talk about all the COVID garbage, but anyway, that's a
But in terms of regulation, I'll just comment about how crazy it is, how complex the EBs are. I mean, we're looking at a number of very complex. I mean, if you haven't looked at an EB from top to bottom before, you should. They're quite complex documents, and little tiny quirks we picked up, which are now leading to possibly $1 million underpayment at a number of different private hospitals. Sure, we need to sort of prosecute that and ensure there's a level playing field between the private hospitals, etc. But gosh, geez, surely we could just make it a lot simpler so that we don't have to go and have these barneys, because all the barneys really do is just to serve to promote the unions.
A question for you, Emilie, has come from Jeremy on the group. Given union membership's falling at a national level, it's probably, I think, all-time low. Does this mean that the Australian Council of Trade Unions will lose power in time? What do you think?
That would be the hope, that as people become less inspired by, less people are in the unions lose power, they lose money. Power is money, money is power. And that would be, I can see that happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. A lot of times union membership falls, but they still have that very strong political influence that we need to be aware of. They still have those connections. So hopefully yes, but not necessarily for sure.
What do you reckon, Jack?
There's still a couple of mechanisms which mean that there will always be higher union rates. For teachers, they're worried about being sued by parents, that it's always going to be high. The CFMEU is always going to be high, while there is a toothless government that keeps giving work to companies that have high levels of CFMEU memberships, and nurses need insurance as part of their registration each year, and unions offer the cheapest way to do it. So no, I don't see them going anywhere as long as the 3 unions. Sure, there'll be a distortion in those 3 unions becoming more dominant while the other unions fail, but unless a mob like us come along, I think they'll keep going.
And as you probably, something we haven't really touched on here at all is superannuation. Through superannuation funds, industry funds, 30 years ago, the unions got their hooks right into a very large sum of money, and they're much wealthier organisations today than they were 30 years ago when their membership was 3 or 4 times the size it is now. And I think that's something we all have to keep in mind.
Well, I agree, Colin. And anecdotally, I remember one particular negotiation for a EB for nurses out of prison. The union was quite meek and mild until it came to the point of what the default industry super fund was, and it was currently Australian Super, which must have been the A-dubs. I don't know who runs that one, but they wanted to put in HESTA, which is the nursing union run super fund, and it was the only issue that they really truly cared about, and drew a line in the sand over, which is just madness. But we ended up doing there's economist, Dr. John Humphreys, to do a research report for us. We polled all of our members, and he ended up concluding that super basically forces people to pay the wrong amount of money at the wrong time in the wrong way. So they basically have got it all wrong totally. Doesn't take into consideration an individual's personal circumstances. Someone might have a credit card debt with paying 20% interest. They're only getting 6 on their super. I mean, why can't that level out? I mean, there's all sorts of individual circumstances which sort of lead to that sort of inequity. It's a worker's entitlement. They've earned it through their work. They should keep it, and they should decide whether it's invested or whether it's goes into their own house or whatever they want to do with it.
The dumbest thing about Supra too is that most people don't realise is that you can take it the day you turn 65 and you can go and put the whole thing on black at the casino and blow it all right then and there, and you still end up going back on the pension, which is the whole point of why you're supposed to be getting Supra in the first place.
Props up the caravan industry.
Well, chances are you're going to be on the pension regardless. 68% of Australians over the age of 65 are on the pension. So pretty much everybody, a good portion of those own multi-million-dollar homes. So if you can set yourself up well in Australia, get that super payment, get that pension payment, live in a big house, you're doing well.
And as Jeff Wang has just said on the group, like tax, Super is theft. Well, I think we can all agree on that, Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Quick logistical things. We are reaching the end of our time, but I have moved out of the main room, and we can now transition to a more open format.
We're going to transition.
We can transition. None of the speakers are required to stay. No one's required to stay. Basically, this is now just a conversation. And so I can unmute people. Well, I won't unmute everyone. I'll just make it so they can unmute themselves. And they can ask questions directly. And this is just mostly a chat at this point.